did I cook that? You so hungry? Me so soupy.
Bleh. Bobby, you are going to make me cringe. Hello everybody, I am Reasonable Rex, the T-Rex you can trust. And here we are reviewing Season 15, Episode 5 of King of the Hill, titled The Best Little Marriage in Texas. I've been pretty excited for this episode for a while because when I saw the original trailer, I thought, hey, you know, Hank and Peggy are going to get kind of roped into this with Peggy leading the charge, and I wanted to see how Hank would handle it. Well, now we finally know. Before we begin, make sure to like the video if you think it's earned it, and subscribe. That lets you see when I put up new videos. It helps support me in making more videos, and overall, I would just really appreciate it. Either way, let's go ahead and get started. The episode opens up with them in church, and something I immediately want to point out here is that kid's face again. I love that kid's face. Why is it drawn like that? I don't know. He looks like he's secretly an undercover agent pretending to be someone else's kid. But also, I should point out that Hank is sleeping through church. Not something I ever thought I would see him do. While King of the Hill wasn't as dedicated to the nuclear family Christian lifestyle that was popular in the 90s and early 2000s, like where we see Homer being forced out of bed to go visit church, it does really align with Hank's views in order to go to church, be a holy man, do the right thing. However, it seems that he's grown bored of it over time, and when the song comes to an end and he gets woken up by Peggy, she says that maybe they should get more involved because they have nothing else to do because Bobby's out of the house. It's once again that reoccurring plot point of them trying their best to fill their time in retirement. They get signed up for marriage counseling, and honestly, I didn't even know that churches would offer marriage counseling, so you know, it's pretty interesting. Peggy is excited because she gets to teach. She loves teaching, and it's always been really my opinion that Peggy loves teaching so much because she gets to be the correct one in front of everybody. She has all the answers, doling them out to everyone who doesn't know anything, making her feel superior. Hank, however, does not really like this idea at all. However, they're corrected when they're told that they won't be teaching. Peggy will actually be doing the cooking and handing out the snacks at the retreat, and Hank will actually be doing some repairs on the cabins because Dale and Nancy are the one hosting it. This is obviously pretty shocking because, as we know, well, Nancy was cheating on Dale for many years with John Redcorn, and even had a child from him. So it's very interesting that they have this marriage counseling position because their marriage wasn't that great. With the A plot set up, we get to establish the B plot. Bobby entered into a competition, a cooking show last season called King of the Grill. I actually kind of forgot about this, and I assume he's going to get in before this episode even ends. In fact, whenever I was talking about this woman, I'm afraid, that kisses him in public, I'm willing to bet it's going to be someone on this show. Knowing how reality TV shows are set up, where it's all about the drama, it's all about the stories, they don't care how good of a cook you are. If you're somebody the audience loves, they'll keep you around. It wouldn't surprise me if this is fabricated in order to get ratings and views. So that calms down the worries I have, although I'm sure there will be some form of explosive blowback from the kiss that we saw in the trailer. Bobby spoke to one of the producers and, well...
So, that was the producer from King of the Grill. Well, they didn't like my submission because they loved it.
Haha, Bobby, that's a joke that I would have heard in middle school. So Bobby wants to pull out all the stops. He wants to get the best ingredients. He wants to prepare the best meals. He really wants to wow this person who is coming to shoot his video with, you know, premium cooking. However, as I mentioned before, these shows are often not about the cooking itself. It's more about the character you portray to the audience. This is especially true in a lot of cooking shows because it's not like the audience at home can actually take a bite of the food. They can look at it and judge how delicious it is based on its looks alone, but they can't get like the aroma, the taste, the texture. If all you can do is produce pretty food, you need something else. And that's where drama, fighting, and bad actors, and wholesome stories, and the underdog, that all builds up to make a compelling show. We then go to the marriage counseling retreat where we see Hank is in his element. Not only is he doing something that he loves to do, which is handiwork, repairing things and fixing things, he's doing it for a good cause. And honestly, you could have just asked him to do these things. It doesn't even have to have the thin veneer of, oh, this is a good thing to do. He just loves working on things. Peggy, however, is not happy with her assignment. She doesn't like just handing out food. And as Nancy and Dale start teaching their class, she immediately takes issue with it. I'm gonna say honestly, I love Dale's method of teaching, tying his job that he works normally at home with this marriage counseling. Peggy immediately takes an opportunity when she gets an opening to start speaking, and all it takes is one of the people in this class asking more about what she means, and she takes a seat and she starts taking the lead. Now, you will always hear me say that Peggy is one of the funniest characters in King of the Hill. I mean, I don't even want to count how many times I've said it in the previous episodes I've covered. The thing is, and the reason that a lot of people don't like Peggy, is she's got a very strong personality and she can never see herself as wrong. In the last episode I covered, she actually had to swallow her pride a little bit and admit that she was wrong. However, this is one of the episodes that builds up the flanderized version of Peggy that a lot of people see, where she immediately takes charge of the class and pushes people out of the way. We'll see a bit more of this later, but when you get too much of Peggy being this way, well, your Peggy cup overflows and she goes from funny to annoying. Back at Robota Chain, we see that Bobby is going through, he's complimenting everyone at his workstation, he's getting their morale up, he's ready to impress. However, when the lady shows up to record his submission to get on the show, he does what he does best. He provides amazing cooking talent along with the history that inspired each dish. Now, while I find this endlessly entertaining and interesting, a TV show will not. You need to be a character, and that is what he's told. I brought it up earlier. They want either drama or passion or underdog or a heartwarming story. I'm cooking because my mom passed away and it's what she left me and she raised me by herself. I'm the best cook around. No one's a better cook than me. I'm gonna put everyone in an early cooking grave and prove how great I am. I learned to cook by working at a gas station where I only heated up pizzas, but I loved doing it so much that I started practicing in my downtime. Stuff like that. They want a character to sell to the audience. They don't actually want a fantastic cook. He's not going to get in based on what he built his restaurant off of, which is tradition, history, and well-cooked foods. Bobby decides, I'm going to build up, I'm going to practice, I'm going to make a character, come back tomorrow, and we'll shoot a good interview tape. We then cut back to the counseling where we see that Peggy has completely taken charge of things, and when Hank returns to do some work inside the cabin, he's forced along right beside her. And this is where everything starts to really fall apart for Peggy. Everything she champions as a virtue of the relationship gets challenged by modern day relationships. Peggy stayed at home. She cooked, she cleaned, she took care of Bobby. I call a little bit of BS on this. There's a lot of times that she was working part-time or even full-time jobs. I mean, look how committed she was to being a reporter. Look how committed she was to selling real estate. But I think if she would have brought that up and they found out that Bobby was a latchkey kid for a while where he would more than likely come home alone and just stay there for many hours by himself, these people would have probably tore him apart for that as well, because that doesn't really fit into the modern idea of what a relationship is. And that's why the Reverend Stroop, also nice to see her back in it. She looks like she's aged a lot more than other characters, but God, am I glad to see her around. She was one of my favorite side characters. Anyway, she suggests that they should join in on their next session as students, not as teachers, to sort of patch the holes in their marriage. Even though their marriage works fine, it doesn't fit the idea of a perfect relationship. As Nancy and Dale continue their lesson, where they blindfold one member of the relationship and have them do a trust walk, it is eating Peggy up. Dale talks about how great trust is when we know that for 20 or so years he was getting cheated on behind his back with him still not knowing. Taking part in the activity, surprisingly, Hank decides to let himself be blindfolded, something I didn't think I'd ever see him do. He seems like the type to kind of be like, no, just let me lead Peggy. But then on the other hand, I can see how Peggy'd be like, I can lead better than no one else. Either way, she's not leading him, she's just venting about everything going on. And while venting about them, with Hank being blindfolded, he blurted out that Nancy was cheating on Dale, and the Reverend heard it. And she can't exactly have somebody leading a marriage counseling class in a religious setting when they've been committing adultery. Cutting back to Robota Chain, we see that Connie shows up to support Bobby as he starts filming all of his different takes for this interview, and boy are they bad. I showed a couple in the intro and I really don't want to watch them again. However, I will point out that he does a fantastic impersonation of Clark Peters. That's probably because both Bobby and Clark Peters are voiced by Pamela Adlon, which has been the voice actress for both of those characters and continues to voice Bobby in the modern time skip seasons that we have today. I wonder what Clark Peters and Dooley are up to. It'd be really funny to see what they're doing. Obviously, none of Bobby's attempts work, and honestly, if I had been that lady, I would have turned around and left after some of these attempts. We then cut to a cabin at the marriage retreat where Peggy and Hank are talking to Reverend Stroop about what happened and what they revealed. The Reverend decides to let them take over the class at least for the rest of the weekend, which obviously has Peggy a little bit excited because she doesn't really trust them to teach based off what she's found out. Back at Robota Chain, Bobby finds out that he's probably not gonna make it, and well,
whatever the hell that means. Those pretentious idiots wouldn't know talent if it was sous vide to the perfect temperature for them.
Oh boy, do I adore this. Why, you might be asking? Well, who else has an uncontrollable anger when it finally breaks? Well, that would be his father, Hank Hill. Hank often gets described as an angry person, but I don't believe that's necessarily true. Hank is an entirely reasonable person until— hey, you get that counter out of here. We don't do that here. Until you do something that upsets him. But when he goes off, he really goes off. And we see that Bobby seems to have inherited this trait. Of course, seeing him go off and unleash his Hank Hill branded anger, well, that's a character they can sell on TV. The heel. The Bobby heel, if you will. Now, if you don't know, a heel is someone who's a villain for the purposes of entertainment. It's a word often tied to wrestling. You look at somebody like Triple H during the Attitude Era who was just an outright villain. There's been other versions of the heel as well. My favorite was always Eddie Guerrero, who was a wrestler who perfectly balanced himself on the knife's edge of being a heel and being a hero. There would be times that he would cheat and use underhanded tactics to get what he wanted, and then there's other times that he would set up others for victory, throwing away whatever he could get out of it. Sadly, Eddie Guerrero passed away in 2005, and he left a hole in the wrestling community. I was still young enough to be really engaged in it at that time, and it actually really hurt me when it happened. Even though this is a King of the Hill video, shout out to you, Eddie Guerrero. Back to the episode, we see that Hank and Peggy go to Dale and Nancy's cabin. Dale is sobbing uncontrollably. Because of course he is. He's Dale. We see that Hank takes Dale out, tempting him with the offer to smoke a cigarette, Dale's favorite pastime, and he only agrees because
maybe smoking a cigarette would make you feel better.
Only because it brings me closer to death.
Oh, Dale. What a fantastic character. Anyway, he goes outside, and with the room cleared of the one person who doesn't know Nancy cheated on him, Peggy's able to talk to Nancy one-on-one, where she asked if maybe the Reverend found out what happened. And Peggy tries her best to not let it slip that, yeah, we told the Reverend. And they buy into it. They're kind of defeated. Nancy then brings up she doesn't seem like the kind of person to teach a marriage counseling class after what she did. It felt like she was repaying her dad, that she was trying to help others so that they didn't make the same mistake as her. And she also enjoyed this time with Dale, and I adore this. I am so against the continuation of John Redcorn and her. From this scene, it feels like, hey, we're keeping it canon that they stopped their little tryst. However, we'll get to that later near the end of the episode, and oh boy am I going to become Unreasonable Rex. Upon hearing how much this meant to her, Peggy gets ready to tell her what happened. However, because of an altercation with Hank, Dale, and one of Dale's rats, she gets interrupted and is unable to tell Nancy the reason why they've been removed from leading the class. Cut to Peggy and Hank reading the material necessary to teach this class, and they sort of stumble into a realization. While they may look at Nancy and Dale's relationship as something messy and not strong enough to lead this class, the younger couples were looking at their relationship the same way. Those younger couples judge them the same way they're judging Nancy and Dale. And it's upon realizing this that Hank does something that you don't get to really see him do often, which is communicate. Hank always holds his emotions and how he's feeling to his chest. Even though this is so many years after everything that happened during the original run of the show, this hasn't changed that much. Nancy, whenever she was trying to take control of the class back, brought up how Peggy mentioned, in private mind you, that she wished she had gone to college and had done more of a career and hadn't been stuck at home raising Bobby. And Hank brings this up. She cuts him off before he can even finish, saying that, she took pride in what she did and she'd do it again and she loved it. And it was the choice she made at the same time. He didn't make that choice for her. What a beautiful moment for these two. And it's upon realizing that, hey, maybe Nancy and Dale's relationship isn't as bad as they think it is, that they come up with an idea. We return to Robota Chain, where Bobby tears into each and every member of his crew. He cuts them down, he does it in a way that if you were watching it on TV as a reality TV show, you'd find funny, using word puns and hitting at people's secrets that they had told him. He's told like, hey, you're definitely going to get a role on this show for being so vile. And when he goes to celebrate with his crew, they don't want nothing to do with him. This isn't the Bobby they work for. They work for a head chef who understands their strengths, supports them, and is always giving them encouragement in their work. We take a quick cut back to the camp where we see that Hank and Peggy are going to load everybody into these different canoes, and this is going to be their lesson. We see when Hank and Peggy gets introduced as the leaders of this class that the students are kind of like, I don't know if I want that because of how they talked about their relationship. And we see in the very back that Dell and Nancy are still devastated. Back at the restaurant, we see Bobby moping in his, I guess, office, break room. I'm not quite sure what this is. And the woman comes in saying like, hey, we just got a bunch of B-roll, which is extra footage of all of your workers talking about how horrible and evil and mean you are. You're definitely going to get in. And Bobby says, if I have to be mean to get in, that's not what I want to be, because that's not who I am. And she leaves, dropping a pretty harsh line saying that, well, I guess you're just always going to be poor then. But Bobby will be rich in morals. You know, this is everything that Hank has taught him paying off. He is being genuine, he's being good, and he's being reasonable. Hey, what did I say about that counter? You get the counter off the screen. His crew commiserates with him and tells him how he doesn't need the show. And Emilio says that, hey, you've got a long career ahead of you. You're only 21, which I don't know how the lady heard this. I don't know where she was, but hearing that Bobby is only 21, she says, actually, we could set you up as the boy genius cook, the kid chef, Bobby the kid. And she thought he was much older. And he's like, well, why did you say that? And she starts calling back all the references he made when he was trying to sell himself as a character. This is actually a very clever inside joke. When the show originally started airing in 1997, Bobby was 11 years old. The modern show is set in around like 2025, 2026. And Mike Judge had tried to keep some form of character progression, but Fox was very against it because they didn't want their viewers to be confused when they ran the show in syndication. Oh my god, I hate syndication. One day I need to do a video talking on that. Syndication is the death of a good story. Anyway, if the timeline had continued normally and Bobby had aged up as he was supposed to, he would be pushing 40. But because they didn't want him to be that old, they sort of played around with the timeline, turning him from an early millennial into a Gen Z. That way that they can keep up their modern commentary on the age gap between him and Hank, because it would be a much harder show to have a 40-year-old Bobby and God knows how old Hank is, I'm not doing the math, please you can't make me, arguing about things that don't matter in the modern setting. With Bobby's position secured on the show, we cut back to Hank and Peggy's lessons, where each of the boats are named like relationship and friendship and things like that. And Reverend Stroop shows up with worship, which is a great pun. But their plan isn't actually to teach a lesson, even though they're putting on this act that it is, that sometimes relationships can be banged up and they need a little bit of work. Instead, it's all a trick. They're going to set up Nancy and Dell to save the day so that they can take the reins back. Hank puts a hole in the boat he's in, and some of the couple start freaking out, one of them because he cannot swim, but as is often the case, as Nancy and Dale start to take over, they left a bucket of tools, I don't know why you would put tools in a bucket, but they did, right by Dale so he can hand them over, playing his part of the hero. And Dale, as he normally often does, messes up and drops them into the water. With quick thinking, Nancy ties the boats to the sinking boat, and they start paddling. They get back to shore, Nancy and Dale stroll off, and the Reverend realizes that although their relationship might be messy, it is a strong one, and they inspire everybody to work together, which is what Peggy and Hank was hoping to pass on to her. We then get the guys in the alleyway where Dell is retelling what happened, of course putting himself as this great hero, which Hank lets happen, because not only is he excited to get his friend back to doing something that was good for their marriage, but his punishment is to do more repair work around the church, which Hank loves. And then this is the part of the episode that really makes me unreasonable. John Redcorn shows up to Nancy to heal her headaches, and I 1,000,000% believe this has nothing to do with an actual headache. They completely retread the original ground that they had set up of her reestablishing her marriage. And why would you do this? This is such a... Hold on. Wait, we're on YouTube. Let's do this the right way. This is such a fucking stupid idea. I hate every moment of this. First off, you're basically stitching together Jonathan Josh's words so that he can have like a robotic response to her telling him that she's fine and doesn't need him anymore. And then you have him leave crying? Whose fucking idea was this? Why would you ever think to do this? You should have just said that their marriage is fine. It would have let John Redcorn's character carry on with dignity. It would have made Nancy not a horrible person. I'm fine with the fact that she cheated on Dale and has recovered from it, is now teaching a marriage class to try and repay her sins and do the right thing and get closer with her husband. But now you're telling me that while she was teaching these classes, she was screwing John Redcorn behind Dale's back some more? Why? Whose idea was this? Was there some extended plot point they were going to play out across all these seasons where she learned the same lesson she learned before? Unbelievable. This tanks this episode in so many different ways, and I cannot believe it. I'm freaking upset. I had to use the will. I've had the will in my back pocket for forever. I didn't think I was going to have to use it. I thought it was going to stay there, forgotten like loose change, and now here it is. Anyway, that's the episode. My wrap-up is going to be short and simple. I love everything about this episode up until that ending. Hank and Peggy getting defensive of how their relationship works to these outsiders, only to chastise how Nancy and Dale's work, only for them to see that it is actually a strong relationship. That's fantastic. Seeing Hank open up and communicate, oh my god, that's so rare. That is a gem to find. Everything to do with Bobby. I'm not gonna lie, I really love the Bobby and Connie parts of this show. In fact, I want more of it. It's what I look forward to more than anything. I do like seeing how Hank and everyone else has settled in their later years. But what I really am excited to see is the new development in Bobby's life. Seeing him stick to his morals and give up an opportunity he would love, something that would be good for him and his business to continue to be such a good person, that's awesome. But that ending just came in like a big old stinky turd at the end of everything. So what do you think? Do you think this was a good episode even with that ending? Do you think that ending is not even really that much of a problem? Also, why the fuck does Hank smile at the end?